Ryan leaned back in the worn leather chair inside the factory's main conference room, his boots propped carelessly on the table. "Let me be clear," he sneered, his voice echoing off the concrete walls. "We figured it's best to tell you now. From today forward, control of this factory, everything, goes to us, untouched and suddenly unappetizing." "What did you just say?" My voice cracked despite my best effort to stay composed. Natalie's grin widened as she leaned back, twirling a golden strand of hair. "Exactly what you heard." "Hannah," Mom's voice snapped through the air, sharp and defensive. Her forced smile vanished, replaced by a tight frown. "Your father and I finalized our will. The house, the lake cottage, all of it will go to Ryan and Natalie." I turned to Dad, searching for any sign of hesitation, a flicker of regret, but his eyes stayed fixed on his fork, hands neatly folded as if bracing for impact. Finally he spoke, voice low and measured. "You need to understand, Hannah. You've done well, your career, your success. We're proud of you. But Ryan and Natalie, they're still finding their way. They need more support." The words hit harder than I expected. Support. That bitter word twisted in my gut. Years of covering their debts, patching their mistakes, paying for the roof over their heads, and it meant nothing. "So this is my reward," I whispered, "for saving this factory from bankruptcy, for taking out that $1 million loan to buy the new CNC machines, for covering payroll when you couldn't, when he couldn't settle on a major, for dropping 30 grand into that lake cottage last summer." Mom exhaled sharply, shaking her head like I was the disappointment. "This is exactly why we didn't want to tell you. You always make it about money, Hannah. It's never about family with you." My fists clenched under the table. "It's always been about family," I bit out. "Every dime, every sacrifice was because you told me family sticks together, and I believed you." Ryan scoffed, stretching lazily. "No one asked you to be the family hero, Hannah. You just liked the feeling. Admit it." Natalie let out a soft, cruel laugh, her eyes gleaming. "Maybe you thought if you threw enough money at us, Mom and Dad would finally love you as much as they love us." The words sliced deep, reopening an old festering wound. I waited for my parents to speak, to defend me, but silence reigned, their indifference more damning than any words. That was it, the moment everything snapped. "You're right, Ryan," I said, my voice eerily calm. "No one forced me, but from this moment on, I'm done being this family's ATM. I'm done being the good daughter who picks up the pieces." I shoved my chair back, the metal scraping against the concrete floor. No one moved. I walked out, past the rows of welding machines and idle workers who dared not meet my eyes. A cruel reminder of the night I'd convinced myself might be different. I grabbed my coat, my movements deliberate, the finality of it sinking in. The door clicked shut behind me, severing the last fraying thread tying me to that house. Outside, the Portland air was cold and sharp against my skin. But it was real, and it was mine, unlike the voices still murmuring inside, growing fainter with every step I took away from them. Voices I'd finally, truly stopped caring about. The city lights blurred past as I gripped the steering wheel, my hands trembling, knuckles white against the leather. I couldn't stop the tears this time. They slid down my cheeks unchecked as I drove aimlessly through the empty streets. My heart splintered from the blow that should have been expected but still struck deep. My own family had used me, discarded me like a spent resource, and left me hollow. Every mile back to my apartment downtown played like a cruel montage. Nights spent poring over spreadsheets, weekends canceled, vacations postponed. Also, they could stay afloat, comfortable, cushioned. Also, I could hear tonight that none of it mattered. that success had made me disposable. When I stepped into my apartment, everything felt foreign, like I'd walked into someone else's life. The walls I'd painted, the furniture I'd chosen with care, they all looked like props from a story I no longer belonged to. Numb, I reached for the bottle of Cabernet I'd saved for a future celebration that suddenly felt like a lie. Tonight, it served a different purpose. I poured a heavy glass and sank onto the couch, the silence suffocating. With one deep breath, I opened the company account, $120,000, equipment maintenance contract, $80,000, supply chain credit line. I stared at the numbers, then canceled both. If they wanted to run the factory, they could figure it out themselves. I stared for a moment, almost daring myself to hesitate. Then, with a flick of my thumb, I canceled them both. The finality of it sent a strange ripple through me, a quiet, unfamiliar defiance. As night bled into early morning, I couldn't stop replaying it. Their words, their faces, the certainty in their dismissal. It wasn't about the money. It never had been. It was about their choice, the confirmation that I had always been the outsider, the afterthought. Yet even through the grief, something began to shift, a slow, creeping liberation. By the time the sun broke over the city skyline, exhaustion had wrung me dry. I stared blankly at my kitchen table, coffee growing cold beside me. The morning news, a low murmur I barely heard. I wasn't sure if I'd been blind all these years or if I'd simply chosen not to see. Either way, the truth was impossible to ignore now. When my phone buzzed against the wood, I flinched. Mom, of course. The message came quickly, her voice clipped and familiar. Hannah, please stop being so dramatic. Call me back. You know family doesn't treat each other like this. A bitter laugh escaped me, sharp, humorless. Family. Her favorite weapon, thrown now with such casual hypocrisy. I deleted the voicemail without a second thought. There would be no more guilt, no more bending. The calls came steadily over the next few days, Mom first, then Dad. Ryan's self-righteous voicemails, Chloe's saccharine pity masked in cruelty. Not once did anyone apologize. No regret, only frustration that the tap they'd drained for years had run dry. By the time Chloe called to accuse me of selfishness, jealousy, she'd spat. I had had enough. I blocked them all, one by one. The silence that followed was deafening, but for the first time it felt like peace. Fragile, tentative, but mine. And yet, beneath that hard-won calm, the ache lingered, deep, persistent, the kind of wound that might never fully heal. So I did the only thing I could. I threw myself into work. Sacramento's medical office complex became my refuge. Site visits, design revisions, and contract meetings. I immersed myself completely. Not because I had to, but because I finally could. No more debts, no more obligations. For the first time in years, I was building something that belonged only to me. Meetings, blueprints, and client walkthroughs, tasks I'd once navigated with ease, now felt like lifelines. The only things keeping me from drowning in the silence, waiting beyond office hours. I buried myself in work, volunteering for site visits, taking on late meetings, anything to avoid going home to an apartment that felt emptier with every passing day. 3 weeks crept by without a word from my family. For a moment, I let myself believe maybe they'd let it go. Maybe this time the battle was over. But deep down, I knew better. It was a Friday when the text came. Simple, direct, laced with entitlement. Family meeting tonight. Hannah, you owe us that much. The words burned as I read them, outrage clawing up my throat. Oh? After everything? I stared at the screen, heart hammering, torn between slamming my phone down and answering with every bitter word I wanted to say. But beneath the fury, curiosity sparked, some foolish, fragile part of me wondering if this was their attempt at reconciliation. Maybe they finally understood. "Fine," I typed back. One word, a battle cry or a surrender. I couldn't tell anymore. The familiar driveway loomed like a graveyard of old hopes. Ryan's polished motorcycle gleamed next to Chloe's obnoxiously blue Kia, two perfect emblems of everything I'd paid for and never been thanked for. My stomach knotted as I approached the door, every memory of this house now soured and alien. Mom greeted me with a smile so brittle it could have shattered. "Hannah, glad you made it." Her voice was tight, her gaze darting past me. "Your Aunt Daisy's here, too." Daisy sat quietly in the corner, her expression unreadable, but her eyes soft with something that almost looked like pity. She rarely got involved. Her being here meant something was different tonight. I sat down, my pulse a drumbeat in my ears as Ryan and Chloe sauntered in, smirking like they'd already won. Dad cleared his throat, folding his hands with rehearsed solemnity. "We called this meeting to clear the air," he began. "Your mother and I thought by now you'd have come to your senses. Clearly, we were wrong." I clenched my fists beneath the table. "Come to my senses?" My voice trembled with restraint. "You cut me out, after everything I've done. The mortgage, the tuition, the cottage renovations, and you're standing here expecting me to see reason." Mom's sigh was theatrical. "Stop being dramatic. You helped, fine. But that was your role as the oldest. Ryan and Chloe need stability." Her eyes narrowed. "It's not our fault you chose your career over family." A bitter laugh tore from my throat. "I chose work because you needed my income. I gave up everything. Friends, vacations, relationships, so you could play house." "Oh, spare us," Ryan scoffed. "No one asked for your charity." "Exactly," Chloe sneered, twirling a perfect strand of hair. "Maybe if you weren't so desperate to be the hero, you'd have a life of your own." The humiliation hit like a slap. I searched my parents' faces, but they stared past me, silent, complicit. Only Daisy shifted, uneasy but still silent. I stood abruptly, my chair scraping the floor like a warning shot. "You know what? You're right. My mistake was believing I mattered here." My voice broke, but I forced myself to be steady. "I won't make that mistake again." As I turned, Dad's voice rang out, cold and final. "If you walk out now, Hannah, don't expect to be welcome back." I froze, hand on the door. A lifetime of swallowed words rose in my throat. "That's fine," I said, my voice shaking with the force of it. "I've never felt welcome anyway." The door closed behind me with a definitive snap, severing something I hadn't realized was still holding on. Outside, the night air hit me hard. Every step to my car felt heavier, a slow funeral march for the family I'd lost long before tonight. Back home, I locked the door behind me like I was sealing off a chapter. The silence didn't scare me this time. It wrapped around me, solid and safe, until a knock startled me, sharp against the quiet. I peered through the peephole. Daisy. Wordlessly, I opened the door. She stepped in and hugged me so tightly the dam finally broke. I sobbed into her shoulder as she whispered, voice thick with emotion. "I'm so sorry, Hannah. You didn't deserve any of that. You've always been the best of us." Her words cracked me open. Years of pain, betrayal, and bitterness spilled free. Daisy held me through it all until the storm passed and I could breathe again. "They're scared," she finally murmured. "Scared of losing their grip on you. Scared of facing what they've done. You terrify them, Hannah, because you proved you never needed them. And in that moment, for the first time, I believed it. The numbers in my banking app, those endless payments, hadn't bought me love. They'd bought my silence, my compliance, no more. My finger hovered over the cancel button, my chest tight with the weight of years, of guilt, duty, and that old familiar voice whispering, "Family comes first, Hannah." My mother's words, once a comfort, now sounded like a noose tightening. Family sacrifices. But that dinner had torn away every illusion. Their betrayal wasn't subtle. It was cold and calculated. I wasn't family to them anymore. I was their wallet, a convenient ATM with my name. Ryan's smug grin flared in my mind like a match, burning through hesitation. My jaw clenched as I exhaled sharply and clicked. Mortgage payment, canceled. Another click. Utilities, gone. It felt like severing a chain I hadn't known was strangling me. The rush of relief was dizzying. For the first time in years, I wasn't carrying them. I was free. Sleep came hard, exhaustion dragging me under until dawn softened Portland's skyline into gold and lavender hues. But the peace was short-lived. My phone buzzed violently on the coffee table, dragging me from sleep. Mom, of course. I inhaled, steadying myself before answering. "What have you done?" she spat, skipping any greeting. "The bank called. Foreclosure, Hannah. You had no right." "No right?" My voice came out calm, deadly. "I paid your mortgage for years, Mom, voluntarily. But I'm done being your safety net. You made your choices. So did I." "You're our daughter," she snapped, desperation rising. "You owe us respect." "I owe you nothing," I cut in coldly. "Respect is earned, Mom, and you threw mine away the second you treated me like a bank account." Her voice cracked. "Hannah, please." "I'm sorry you're upset," I said, meaning every word. "But this is over." I hung up before she could speak again, my hand shaking as the finality settled. The calls didn't stop. Dad, Chloe, even cousins I hadn't heard from in years, all demanding, pleading, guilt-tripping. Each voicemail was another stone on a crumbling foundation I refused to rebuild. I silenced the phone, and in the quiet I felt something new. Power. Weeks passed. Life didn't just return to normal. It became mine. Work filled the space where family guilt once sat. I booked the Italy trip I'd put off for years. For once, my hard-earned money went toward me. The loneliness still crept in, quiet and sharp at night, but it was mine too, and I could live with it. Then came Sacramento, a project review, perfectly timed. 3 days of site inspections, final walkthroughs, no family, no calls, just work. I came back late Friday, worn down but lighter. Until I reached my door, I stopped cold. The frame was wrong, misshapen. Foam insulation oozed from every crack, hardened into grotesque lumps. My stomach flipped. I touched it, solid, immovable. Someone had sealed me out of my own home. Panic shot through me, chased quickly by rage. I knew who did this. Only one person is petty enough, vindictive enough: Ryan. I dialed building management, breath shallow with fury. Hours dragged until a weary locksmith arrived, shaking his head as he surveyed the damage. "Someone really didn't want you going inside," he muttered while chiseling at the foam. The clock neared midnight by the time he pried the last bit free. I sat heavily on the couch, too wired to rest, my mind spinning. Then I remembered the factory floor cameras. My hand shook as I pulled up the footage, and there he was, Ryan, laughing as he cut the power lines, knowing exactly what he was doing. My hands trembled as I pulled up the footage, and there he was, Ryan, hoodie up, baseball cap low, but it was him, clear as day, laughing as he sprayed the foam, eyes gleaming with spite. I stared at the screen, bile rising. This wasn't just about money. This was personal, a final vicious blow meant to remind me where I stood. But watching him, his glee, his malice, something inside me hardened. I wasn't the same sister who stayed quiet, who carried the weight because no one else would. Not anymore. With hands steadier than I expected, I saved the footage. Staring at the screen, I felt it. Cold, certain resolve. This wasn't just my brother. This was my line in the sand. Could I really turn my own brother in? The question gnawed at me as I stared at the police report form, heart thudding. But this wasn't a petty sibling fight anymore. Ryan had crossed a line, trading selfishness for something criminal. I needed clarity, so I called Aunt Daisy. Her voice came soft but steady. "Hannah, listen to me. Protecting him now isn't love. It's permission. You don't fix someone by shielding them from the fallout." Her words steadied the storm inside me. I'd spent my life bailing them out. This time, I had to save myself. The next morning, I filed the report. Quiet, methodical. I handed over the footage, my stomach tight but my hands remarkably still. By sunset, my phone was a war zone. Voicemails, texts, all of them venom. Vindictive, heartless, a traitor. But underneath the rage, I heard it, panic. For the first time, they knew I was serious. Dad's call came last, his voice brittle with forced calm. "What will it take, Hannah, to make this go away?" $3,000. I didn't hesitate. The cost of the repairs, nothing more, nothing less. His laugh was bitter. "That's extortion." "No," I shot back, voice like ice. "That's consequence. Ryan vandalized my home. He pays or he faces the charges. His choice, silence." Then a sharp click. He hung up. By morning, the deposit hit my account. $3,000, the memo line bitterly labeled final payment. I stared at it, not with triumph, but with a strange, quiet satisfaction. It wasn't the money. It was the proof, finally, that they understood. Actions had consequences. Ryan's cruelty hadn't broken me. It had forged something stronger. Weeks passed. The rage-filled calls stopped, replaced by a suffocating silence. No apologies, no contact. At first, the quiet felt like relief. Then it twisted, settling over me like a heavy shroud. They'd made their choice, and once again, I wasn't the side they chose. The whispers started soon after. Aunt Daisy called late one night, voice tight with worry. "Your father's telling the board you tried to bankrupt the company, that you're the reason suppliers are pulling out, that you're trying to make them homeless." I sank onto the couch, stomach churning. "That's insane," I whispered. "They gave me no choice." "I know, sweetheart, but people don't. They're painting you as cold, greedy, the villain." The betrayal cracked something inside me, grief rising like a wave. Years of sacrifice, canceled vacations, sleepless nights covering their debts, erased, rewritten into a story where I was the monster. Enough. I stood, fury giving me clarity. For the first time, I wouldn't let them control the narrative. I wouldn't stay silent. I sat at my laptop, fingers trembling as I typed, page after page of truth. Every sacrifice laid bare, the mortgage payments, Ryan's tuition, Natalie's endless whims, and the footage, proof of Ryan's vandalism. Years of silent suffering spilled out, raw and unapologetic. Then, with a breath, I hit post. The internet doesn't wait. Responses poured in, sympathy, shock, outrage. Friends were horrified by what I'd endured. Others scolded me, clinging to the sanctity of family matters. But I didn't care. For once, my voice was louder than theirs. Then came Mom's call. Her voice, sharp with rage, blasted through the voicemail. "How dare you humiliate us? You had no right." A bitter laugh escaped me. "No, right?" I called her back, heart pounding. "You want to talk about rights? You lied. You made me the villain after everything I did. You abandoned us, she hissed, all because we chose to help your siblings who needed it most. No, I snapped, voice breaking but strong. You abandoned me the moment you decided my efforts meant nothing. You taught Ryan and Natalie entitlement, and now you're choking on it. There was silence, cold, final. You've destroyed this family, she whispered. No, I said softly. You did that all by yourselves. And then I hung up, for the last time. No, I whispered, my voice steady despite the tremble in my chest. You did that yourself. Then I hung up, heart pounding, tears blurring my vision as the weight of it all crashed down, guilt twisted like a blade, sharp and persistent. Had I truly destroyed my family by finally standing my ground? Was it wrong to demand respect after years of silent sacrifice? A knock broke through my spiraling thoughts. I wiped my face hastily and opened the door. Aunt Daisy stood there, worry carved deep into her expression. Without a word, she pulled me into a fierce hug, the kind that asked for nothing and offered everything. Hannah, she murmured, her voice trembling, your post. It changed things. She stepped inside, her eyes shining with a quiet kind of pride. Some of the family finally sees it, all the things you did that your mother hid. No one knew, Hannah, no one. I let out a shaky breath, relief mingling bitterly with grief. Does it even matter now? Yes, Daisy said firmly, reaching for my hand. It matters. Your voice matters. You deserve better. They chose lies, but that doesn't mean you stay buried beneath them. Her words landed like a lifeline, steadying me. For the first time in weeks, I felt something other than rage or grief. I felt seen. Slowly, the suffocating weight of their betrayal began to ease, replaced by a fragile, unfamiliar hope. I wasn't invisible anymore. Days later, my phone buzzed. A text from Chloe, sharp, bitter. Thanks a lot. Everyone hates us now. Hope you're proud. I stared at the words, heart oddly calm. For so long I'd craved their approval, chased scraps of affection. But now, standing in the wreckage, I realized the truth. It was never love. It was conditional, transactional. Love with strings. I typed back, my hand steady. I'm done apologizing for your choices. Maybe now you'll finally learn what responsibility feels like. No reply came. I didn't expect one. Weeks passed. The judgmental whispers from extended relatives faded, swallowed by their own distractions. My parents struggled, finally forced to face the debts and bad decisions they'd ignored for years. They took part-time jobs. Ryan spiraled, lashing out, blaming everyone but himself. Chloe drifted, furious but directionless. And me? I breathed. For the first time in my life, I breathed. I poured myself into work, the career I'd always loved but never fully owned. Promotions followed, raises, recognition that wasn't tethered to guilt or obligation. I signed the paperwork for a corner office one quiet Friday afternoon. Floor-to-ceiling windows, sunlight spilling across polished floors. For the first time, my paycheck was mine. Every hour, every dollar, every ounce of effort, mine. 6 months slipped by, the toxic shadow of my family slowly fading. The silence they left behind no longer felt like abandonment. It felt like peace. It hadn't been easy, God, it hadn't. Some nights I lay awake, haunted by memories, by the ache of what I'd lost. But as the seasons turned, so did I. The sharp edges dulled, replaced by something gentler, stronger, freedom. They'd thought cutting me out of their will would destroy me. Instead, it forced me to find a strength I never knew I had, the courage to choose myself. And for the first time, I wasn't looking back. No more mortgage payments draining my account. No frantic midnight transfers to cover another lien, another crisis, or Chloe's latest impulsive whim. Every dollar I saved felt like a small rebellion, proof that choosing myself wasn't selfish. It was survival. For the first time, my money was mine. And with it, I booked a 2-week trip to Italy. Something I'd always dreamed of but never dared pursue. Guilt always whispering that I should put my family first. Standing alone at the edge of the factory yard, the old rusted containers towering around me, I felt something unexpected. Peace. They tried to destroy me, but all they did was set me free at sunset. The air rich with the scent of blooming jasmine and distant chiming bells. I felt something I hadn't in years. Peace. Pure, unburdened joy, untouched by obligation or shame. When I returned home, I joined a local hiking group, reclaiming the weekends I'd once surrendered to their endless demands. On one trail, beneath towering evergreens and a sky so blue it hurt to look at, I met Jake. He had an easy laugh and eyes that saw right through me, not in judgment, but understanding. Every conversation, every shared mile stitched something back together inside me. His quiet support didn't try to fix me. It simply said, "You're enough." And for once, I believed it. Months slipped by peacefully until a cold November night broke the stillness. A knock echoed through my apartment. When I opened the door, there was Aunt Daisy, wrapped in her favorite faded sweater, cheeks flushed from the cold, holding 2 steaming cups of coffee. Without a word, she pulled me into a hug, the kind that loosened every knot in my chest. "I'm proud of you, Hannah," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You deserve this life you're building, all of it." We sat together, the city lights glittering beyond the windows as she spoke softly, her words cutting through the last shreds of my doubt. "Your parents. They're still blaming you. They won't stop, Hannah. They can't see past their pride. But you did what they couldn't. You broke free." I stared into my cup, voice barely a whisper. I still think about them. Not because I regret leaving, but because it hurts knowing they never loved me the way I loved them. Daisy reached for my hand, her grip warm and steady. Sometimes, family's not who you're born to, it's who truly sees you. And sweetheart, you're finally seeing yourself. Her words settled deep, easing a wound I hadn't even realized was still bleeding. That night, we laughed, shared stories, and for the first time, I felt the heaviness of my past shift, just enough to breathe again. In the weeks that followed, the occasional whisper from distant relatives drifted my way, a bleak picture of the family I'd left behind. Mom worked long shifts at a diner. The lines of exhaustion were carved deep. Dad hauling lumber at the hardware store, shoulders stooped with age. Ryan is still dodging responsibility, chasing one get-rich-quick scheme after another, and Chloe, lost in the delusion of becoming an influencer, her dreams evaporating with every staged photo. On Christmas Eve, instead of drowning in bitterness, I filled my home with laughter. Close friends gathered, people who'd become my real family. Aunt Daisy sat in the corner, her eyes shining as she watched me toast to survival, to independence, to choosing joy. As the night ended and my guests faded into the cold, I stood by the window, staring out at Portland's lights twinkling against the dark sky. The pain was still there, like an old scar, but it no longer owned me. My parents had tried to punish me, cut me out of their will, leave me with nothing. But what they didn't realize was they gave me everything I truly needed: freedom. In the end, their rejection became my liberation. They left their possessions to Ryan and Chloe, but I inherited something far more valuable: the right to choose my own happiness, my own life. And now, as I stand here whole and unbroken, I wonder, what would you have done in my place? Would you have kept sacrificing for a family that never saw your worth? Or would you have walked away, even if it meant losing them forever? Tell me, what would you choose?